Hello and welcome to RetroBreeze. In this video, we'll be taking an extreme close-up look at the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. We'll be looking at minute details like texture, movement of buttons, and the manufacturing accuracy on a micro level. Now I'm the type of person that when I order something or I'm thinking about ordering something, I want as much information as possible. I watch a ton of videos, I read as much as I can, I talk to others about the thing. I just really like being well informed and excited. So I thought I'd make some content that I always want to see but I never do. That's a video showing extreme close-ups and minute over-the-top details. I've never seen a full macro investigation of a device like this, and I believe this will be the closest look at the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus that you will find anywhere on the internet. I'm super excited about this one, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Actually first, I'm going to give this thing a good spray with some compressed air. I'll try to keep the device as dirt and dust free as possible during this video, but at this magnification it might be kinda difficult. Now that's out of the way though, let's take our first extreme close-up of the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus's D-pad. Alright, here we are with the D-pad. You can see there's a surprising amount of space between the D-pad itself and the shell, with quite a bit of movement between the two. Oops, sorry, I'll try and keep my fingers out of this as much as I possibly can. Here, you can see the switch actuating. Now we're going to move out a little and take a look from another angle. Now that we're in focus, you can see some lovely machining on the arrow in the center circle. Look at the texture of the button too. Here it is at a more vertical angle, as it protrudes from the shell. You can really see the amount of travel, and how the maximum depression is still pretty high up from the shell. This is a really lovely D-pad by the way, one of the best I've ever used on a handheld. Pretty similar to the RGB 10 Pro, although a little bit bigger. Here I switch the focus to the L and R directions. Check out how the whole thing pivots on the center point. Amazing. Next up, the left analog stick. First of all, a little psh psh. Now, if you've ever seen a Nintendo Switch Lite stick, this is more or less the same thing, except for the lack of a push switch for L3. Here's the tilt of the stick in each direction. And here it is from a different angle. I'm trying to give you as much of a look at this movement as possible. Here's the underside of the stick. There's a surprising amount of texture here, and I like seeing it roll over the ball. It kinda reminds me of the new Kirby game if anybody's played that. One last thing to see is the body of the stick module. You can see some gaps under the stick. On the bottom too, it doesn't quite fill out the hole in the shell. Let's move on to the home, select and start buttons. Check out the texture of those buttons. Also, you might notice some blurring on the sides of the screen. It's just from the lens, just try to ignore it. Now these are very clicky buttons. Again, there appears to be a little more movement within the shell than I had previously noticed, although this is definitely exacerbated by the close-up view. In reality, this is like 1/10 of a millimeter or so. Also, you can ignore this little hole here. I made this in a failed mod attempt. Here's another angle which highlights the texture and the printed labels above the buttons. Here they are sticking out from the unit. Despite the small travel, they still don't go flush with the case. Now onto the exciting stuff, the face buttons. Let's start with the B button. Something to note about these buttons is that they're painted. You can really notice here how the paint fills out the engraved label. It's not quite even and it's very noticeable, especially on the bright yellow. On the B button there's a little nubbin at the top here. Here's me actuating the button. See how it depresses and how it moves within the shell. Let's move on to Y. On the upper prongs of the Y, you can really see how the paint hasn't quite filled out properly. Again, I'm going to click this and move it around a bit for you to see. Also, take note of the B button. It moves when I press the Y button. Similarly, the Y and A buttons move when I press B. This is because the buttons are actually connected to one another underneath here. Let's move on to X. Again, you can really see how the paint isn't quite even here at the top. Either this was sprayed at an angle, or maybe the excess paint ran off in one direction, leaving the upper edges of the engraving with less paint. Anyway, time for more clicking and rolling around. And finally, here's the A button. Same deal here, a teeny lack of paint on the upper corner of the label. Now this is interesting. A surprising amount of paint is missing from the side of this button. I can't wait to show you more. I'll turn it after we click this button a few times. Alright, here we are at a standing angle. Check out this paint scratching off here. The A button is the most used button in my case. Now I'm not really concerned by this, but I do wonder if the paint will wear off over a year or two. Actually, I think I could scratch this paint off myself, but let's not. I'll click the rest of the buttons a few more times as well. Now from this angle on the B button, you can see two imperfections, one right here and then a bigger one. It's like the paint flowed over that little nut of plastic there. Now the Y is squeaky clean except for the paint on the label, but you can't see it from this angle. Now here's the buttons being pushed from a bird's eye view. There's actually a bit of an angle on the X button here. I'm not upset by it, I'm just making observations here. A lot of these micro details are totally irrelevant in normal use, but we're all nerds here, so we like to see stuff like this. And finally, here's all the buttons close up, looking lovely and clear in this one-of-a-kind video made just for you. And just for you, I'm going to prod these buttons one more time. Now it's time for the infamous right analog slider. It's kind of hard to move around with my pokey thing, but I'll try to show you anyway. There's some substantial rotation in the stick, which I do actually notice while I'm playing. Here's up, down, left, and right. This is again more or less the same as the Switch Lite's analog stick cover. You can actually get a spudger under here quite easily. Here's another angle. Check out the texture. Here's the side-on view. You can see the mold line and the rubber in the center here. There's a little tag of rubber hanging off down here as well. You can really see the rotation of the stick here, and it's not just the cover rotating, the entire unit twists. Funnily enough, there's some really noticeable tilt from this close-up view as well, but you don't feel that at all while you're playing. It just feels like a slider, sadly. This is also a really tough angle to film, so excuse me. Now let's pop this cover off and take a look at it, but before we do, you might have noticed on this and the left stick that there's always dust and dirt covering them. I just cannot keep them clean. They're the only sticks I've ever used, including those on the real Nintendo Switch, that actually feel gritty all the time. Oh, and I just noticed I'm scratching this thing up. Oh well. Now finally let's pop this off. Here's the underside of the cover. It's pretty simple, and yep, that's what it looks like. Here's the slider mechanism itself. First, the prong. Here's how it moves. Also, I don't think I've ever used the word prong before today. Now let's look at the inside part. It's kind of a round wavy pattern on it. First of all, time for another spray, which I just realized made this a lot worse. Here we go, you can see it much better from this angle. Who knows why it's green underneath here, honestly, but oh well. Now here's the left speaker grill, which I'll spray here to absolutely no effect. Now here's the printed Retroid Pocket 2 logo. which doesn't say plus at all. Here's the right speaker grille. Now let's look at the edges of the screen so that you can see how well it sits in the shell. Note, this part here is my screen protector. It's not the best application in the world, so just forgive me for that. Here's another useless spray. You can see a few bits and pieces within the gap there. I also struggled a little bit with the focus here. And yep, that's the screen. Before I move on, let me show you the texture of the plastic. It took me a while to find a good focus, but you can see the slightly rough looking texture. Even though it feels smooth to the touch, it's really noticeable up close. I do really like the plastic on this device though, it's really nice. Alright, on the back here, the first thing we're looking at are the rubber screw covers. One in the top left, one in the bottom left, one in the bottom right, and one in the top right. I've actually taken these out already so they're not really pushed in all properly. I'm going to take this one out for you to see, because you get all the most fascinating content here at RetroBreeze. It's a soft rubbery cylinder that you can just kind of poke out. It also has a mote of dust on. Gross. Here's the other side with a hole in it. And here it is from the side. It's a rubber cap and not very interesting to be honest, but hey, we're here to be nerds and look at things. You can see the screw in there, it's just a normal Phillips screw. You can also see a little roughness to the shell around here. Now let's just get this little nubbin put back in. I'm just gonna shove it in there. This is absolutely enthralling content. Here's the label, and I'm pretty sure this is the only video on the internet where you'll actually be able to read what this label says. Retroid Pocket, model RP2, which is a lie, the battery capacity and voltage, the input, and then a bunch of other stuff and the usual made in China. On the back here you can really see the texture of the plastic. It's actually a little different from the front, interestingly. There's a really grainy, almost sandblasted texture despite it being very smooth to the touch. Now it's time to look at the all-important triggers. Here they are. You can see a little bit of the construction inside there, as well as some dust which I'll now spray off. Here, I'll push down on the trigger for you guys to see. There's not much travel, but man, they feel so good. Notice the spring back. It really feels nice. You can also push almost directly inward from the outside if you prefer. Inside, you can see some of the rough moulding on that inner part. On that note, you can also see a little flake of plastic on the edge of the trigger here too. I only just noticed this and never did while I was playing it. Here's the left trigger, it's much the same as the right trigger. But notice the lack of the plastic tag that was on the other side. Anyway, please don't take any of this as detriments to the device. I'm just pointing them out because it's fun. It's not something I've ever seen while playing the device or felt or anything like that. That said, there's no flake on the left trigger at all. It seems to be a much better malt than the right. Let's move on and look at these triggers from the top. So here is the L with that lovely stamped engraving. You can see how this pulls away from the case where you push it. It's a little easier to do with my thumb, so excuse me. Here's the R as well. Honestly, these triggers are just so nice, they're stunningly comfortable to use. Here's the left bumper. These buttons are kind of strange. They're very clicky and very narrow. I'm not sure why they don't fill out this space more. Again, not a complaint, just an observation. You can push it from the top or from the side. Here's the right bumper, and there's a tiny bump in the crook of the R here. There's a lot of movement back and forth on these buttons, which makes them really comfortable because it doesn't really matter where you rest your finger. Now let's take a look from the side. This is a really lovely angle actually. Here's the right bumper, which needs a good dusting. You can see it's a bit wobbly, but that's nothing to worry about. You can see the slight downward rotation of the trigger from this angle. I think the way these work is kind of genius. They're screwed to the PCB, and there's a piece of rubber that rests on a tactile switch, which is flat, like angled in this direction. Then the trigger pushes against it like this. Really cool stuff. Over to the left side, which again is noticeably better machined than the right side. It's interesting that this plastic in the middle moves around even though it's not attached to either the trigger or the bumper. I'm curious as to what this piece is and why it's there instead of extending the trigger or the bumpers. Let's take a look at the top of the device now, starting from the left. Here's our micro HDMI port, which, by the way, works unbelievably well. It's actually kind of astonishing how well the Retroid works when attached to the TV, especially with Dreamcast, it's just so good. Anyway, moving on. Here's the Usbc port. You can see that both of these ports are not quite centered in the case, which is kind of interesting. Well, not really. Regardless, it doesn't affect the usage of them at all. Here are the volume keys, which is one solid button with lots of texture. They're very clicky with barely any travel, but I don't really care. Here's the power button and LED. Notice the power button is connected to the volume rocker, which is why they will move together. The power button is slightly recessed, which means you won't accidentally push it, which also makes the volume keys easier to find. Here's the LED. Mine has a little plastic up there which I tried to get out, but you can see the slightly rougher cutout on the LED anyway. It's also recessed inside the case, which I think helps keeping the brightness in check. The next thing we'll look at is the SD card slot and the headphone jack on the bottom. This here is a rubberized cover. Yep, that sure is rubber. You'll notice that the headphone jack is inset by quite a lot, but works just fine. Now, I'm gonna try and open this on camera, but it's super hard because the camera's just way too close. That's better. Now let's pop this thing open. By the way, this thing is a huge pain in the butt. I'm glad it is there overall, but it is a real pain to get open. And there's a slot in the SD card in there. This tab up here is probably the roughest part of the whole device because you kind of dig against it to open the port. And here it all is closer up. Super interesting and only available from RetroBreeze. Now let's try and close this up with my pokey tool, which was quite a chore. Perfect. Although it is impossible to get this thing totally flat, to be honest. Okay, we're getting to the end here. I'm now going to show you the seam between the two halves of the shell. Now the seam isn't perfect, but bear in mind that the Retroid is one of the most premium devices in the retro game hardware space right now. I've got my spudger here for a bit just so you can see some of the unevenness between the seam. This part here is my fault, I bent the plastic while I was taking it apart, so don't worry about that too much. Here's another uneven part of the seam. Here's the top side. Again, please don't take any of this as a fault or a complaint. This is about as close to a perfect build as we've ever seen in this space so far. I just want to give you the most detailed look at this device as I possibly can. This corner here is a little loose. I think I could just tighten the screw here to close it up. Here's the right side. You can see that flake on the trigger which I kinda want to take off. Now I will resist. Actually, I'm going to turn this around. Starting in the corner here. Again, I've pried this thing apart, so some of these bends on the plastic are my fault. Even so, they're something I can barely see with the naked eye, to be honest. That said, the seam overall on the Retroid is pretty uneven, but again, the construction of this device is really premium and is one of the best feeling out there. And that about brings us to the end of this video. The last thing I want to do is show you the screen. This isn't really representative of anything, but everybody loves pixels, so why not? Also, the screen on this thing is just tremendous, it's just so nice. Alright, and that's about it for today. I did have a lot of fun making this video, so let me know in the comments if you enjoyed it. I'll definitely look forward to making more of these macro style videos in the future, especially when I get my AYN Odin. Please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more interesting content. I'm Shem from RetroBreeze, and I will see you next time.